All right. Well, here we go. This is Brent Rains for doing an interview with Dr. Gregory Little tonight. It's Thursday, January the 13th. Luckily, it's not Friday the 13th. And we're going to be talking this time about the late, great Swiss psychologist, Dr. Carl Jung, who, was a student in his early career with Sigmund Freud. He later became just as famous. Anyway, Dr. Jung was quite a complex, fascinating character, and Greg has studied him very deeply. Wrote a book on him, The Archetype Experience, back, was it 83 or 84?
84 it came out.
Yeah. And in a lot of your writing since then, you continue to expound upon his concepts and ideas and things. So, what are we going to mention about him this time?
I think we'll talk about his ideas on UFOs and flying saucers. Is that good?
Right. Sounds good, yeah.
Yeah, well, his last book was called Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. Came out in 1959. Originally, the U.S. paperback was actually A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies. I actually that's the version that I had and referenced in the book that I had come out in 1984. And actually, I had criticism because they said, "Oh, he can't even get the title right." But I did get the title right. Anyway, so let me go back to the beginning on this, and just I think I really want to say what Jung really said. What did Jung mean? Because I've read so much by so many people, and it just seems that almost nobody really understood what Carl Jung was saying about UFOs and flying saucers. So it was back in roughly 1979 to 1982. I had shoved aside all of my interest in UFOs, archaeology, and everything else, and was finishing my doctorate, which I got in counseling and educational psychology. And I had gone part-time for many years. I was in full-time jobs, but I decided I really needed to finish my doctorate. I had a few courses left in a dissertation. So the very moment I finished that, which was in early 1982, I then immediately turned my attention to a UFO flying saucers book that I'd wanted to write since the 70s. And in doing that, of course, I was led to Carl Jung. At that time, I really believed that UFOs were extraterrestrial. I thought they were aliens visiting, that's what it was. And I was really fascinated with like 10 cases that are really unexplained. They still are today. Put those in the book. And in the course of doing the book, I discovered a lot of things that Jung really said about flying saucers that other people either missed, they didn't understand it, they misinterpret it. I don't know, but everybody seems to think that Jung said that UFOs are in the mind, that it's some sort of a psychological thing. And yeah, they often say we project the extraterrestrial stuff onto them. But what Jung did around in the late 1940s, when the whole flying saucer craze began, Jung started accumulating evidence mainly from the United States. He did a tremendous amount of correspondence. You can actually go online and find Jung's letters about UFOs and flying saucers because he was asked about it by a lot of people. So he decided he'd write a monograph. Then he decided he'd go ahead and expand it a bit. And it wound up being the last book that Carl Jung actually wrote. He wrote some things after it, but they weren't a book. So the last thing he wrote about was flying saucers. So here's what he really said. Jung really believed that the abductees, and they really weren't abductees at the time. The people that Jung was talking about were more like contactees. They were approached by aliens. An alien would land in the back and come out and maybe hand them a pancake. Old Joel Symington, that was an example. There was another fellow named Orfeo Angelucci that Jung was really interested in, because Orfeo decided what he had interacted with were a bunch of angels and spiritual beings, and Jung was really interested in all of that. But what Jung said were really two big things, and then we have to explain those. One is encapsulated in a statement that he made many, many times in letters and in articles and in the book. And that exact statement is, put my little quote marks up here, okay. Something is seen, one doesn't know what. Let me say that again. Something is seen, one doesn't know what. So what Jung is saying, we were really seeing things back then. There really are these anomalies, the UAPs, UFOs, flying saucers, whatever you want to call them. They really are there. But the observer and us, we don't know what those things are. So something's being seen, we don't know what it is. So then that takes us to the next thing. Jung, let's do a shout out to his mentor, his early mentor, and that was Sigmund Freud. You mentioned that. Every single defense mechanism's known: denial, projection. There's about a dozen defense mechanisms. All of those were found by Freud, and then Jung wrote about some of them in his own way, utilizing his own unique perspective. And so what he said was that there's a defense mechanism that we employ called projection. And the way it works is this. I can explain it a couple ways. One is, it's kind of like there's a movie projector in your head, and that movie projector comes out the front, and then it projects onto things that we don't understand or know. And it's like the unknown that is being seen in the UFOs, the thing that people are seeing that we don't know what it is. The movie projector is flipping on, and it is literally using that thing or that event as a screen. And so it's projecting something onto that screen. And what it's projecting onto the screen is the percipient or the witness's belief system, their own ideas, their culture, their background, so that somebody who really believes in the extraterrestrial hypothesis sees this object. We don't know what the object is, but they're projecting onto it that it must be something extraterrestrial, and it has extraterrestrial beings in it. That is how projection works. It works in normal life too. The whole idea of love at first sight is about projection. There's a song called Some Enchanted Evening that's all about projection. Some enchanted evening, you will see a stranger. You'll see a stranger across the crowded room, and you fall in love. And the reason you fall in love, you're seeing this person, you're seeing this individual, and you are projecting attributes onto that person. You think you know them. It's love at first sight to you, and it all comes from your own belief system, your own unconscious contents, and so on being projected onto that person. And that's the way it often is in relationships. You know, you see somebody and you really like them at first, and then later you start really seeing who they are. It's like, well, I don't really want to be around this person. And the opposite can occur. There are some people who might rub you the wrong way and you really don't like, and you're projecting onto them. But as you get to know them better and you see the real content of their character, you begin to like them more. So that's projection. So what's being projected? Well, Jung said that when the UFOs began, it was at the beginning of the Cold War and the nuclear age. So people already had unconscious contents of fear. Everybody believed. I remember the nuclear countdowns that we had. I remember the 1 minute to midnight stuff that we did. I remember hiding under school tables in our drills in case a nuclear bomb hit our little town in the mountains of Pennsylvania. We could all survive under our school desks. I remember all that. So Jung was writing at that time, and he believed that it was all of our fears and so on that we projected. There's one more piece to this that I got to go to after I explain this, but we projected our hopes and fears onto the objects, and that we were looking for some type of salvation. Now, a mistake that I believe Jung made in that, I've never talked about this before. He, in the very beginning of the book, in the preface, he said that every time that there is a change in the great year, which are the zodiac signs, and everybody thinks we're in the age of Aquarius, Jung said at the cusp of every age over the Earth's 26,000 year cycle on its wobble and the precession of the equinoxes, that roughly every 2,100 years, the astronomical or astrological sign changes, and we were going into the age of Aquarius. And he said every time that changes, there are things seen in the sky. And so he went back a few thousand years, and yes, there were things seen in the sky then. My belief is there are always things seen in the sky, that this is always going on. So the last piece to what Jung said was that what is driving our interpretation, aside from our fears and our hopes for salvation, is that they are, in essence, the flying saucers are representative of a symbol, and the symbol is a mandala, spelled M-A-N-D-A-L-A. Some people call it a mandala. Mandala is the term that I learned in college, and that's the term I'll use. And it's a round shape, disc shape. It is a symbol of the wholeness. And that is why Jung believed that we were interpreting the symbol of wholeness as a symbol coming to save us from the dire predicament nuclear weapons had put us in. So that's kind of a summary of what Jung said. I haven't really discussed archetypes, which are the other piece of this. Archetypes are symbols. The mandala is the only symbol of wholeness. And then there are lots of splinter archetypes, all existing in opposites. So Jung said that these archetypal symbols are already in us. They are built into us. We get them genetically, and that these archetypal symbols have certain meaning already attached to them. But Jung also said that archetypes exist independently and autonomously on their own, and that is that they are real. They can become physically real, and Jung called them psychoid factors. Psychoid is spelled P-S-Y-C-H-O-I-D, a very strange word, missed by almost everybody who read Jung. But a psychoid factor is something that can transform itself from an energy state to a physical state and become physically real. So Jung believed a great deal of the UFO phenomenon is being caused by archetypal manifestation, and then we project the meaning onto it. In other words, we are interacting with these archetypes, applying our cultural ideas, our cultural beliefs and expectations, our hopes and dreams, and everything else. That was his explanation of UFOs. But again, something is there, something's seen, but we don't really know exactly what it is. But Jung thought it was autonomous. He didn't think all these things were, experimental craft or whatever. In fact, he did have a lot of letters with military people. A lot of the military people were interested in what Jung said. So that's the summary of it. We've actually made this almost in time. And you got any follow-up question to it?
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere years ago that Jung was not satisfied with the way people were misinterpreting his ideas, so he wrote the book.
Yeah.
And even now, as you point out, it is confusing and complex and deep. It's just like psychoid. I was going to mention that if you hadn't. I remember in the book he wrote about his own experience being in the presence of a medium, and there were four people there looking at this moon-shaped orb hovering over the medium's abdomen, and they could see it clearly, they claimed, and they couldn't understand why, try as they might, they couldn't get Jung to see what they were seeing, and he called that a psychoid.
Yeah, interesting.
And it kind of reminds me of an experience too. I found out later that he had in another book when he was in Italy, Ravenna, Italy. There was this old Roman city, and he went with a colleague into this room, and there were all of these mosaic illustrations of scenes from the New Testament, like Jesus walking on water and being baptized and so on. And he spent about a good 10 minutes or more standing in front of one of them, analyzing them. And, he mentioned that there was kind of an odd blue illumination to the room, but he didn't think too much about it. Anyway, later he found out the room didn't exist, at least not in this time. And his colleague was never convinced that they hadn't seen all this, that they were actually in this room. But, that to me is another psychoid experience right there. So he was.
Yeah. Well, psychoid means it bridges the gap between a psychological reality and a physical reality. And that's really what the term implies. But Jung was talking about archetypes as psychological realities, and archetypes become physically real through that process. And I believe that actually does happen. Jung didn't have enough background yet in physics and so on, which certain physics was really in its infancy back then. And I'm pretty convinced that he would have incorporated ideas of physics and a lot of John Keel's ideas, because Keel really said the same thing that Jung did. He used his own terminology just as Jung did. But that's another story, and that'll take us another two 15-minute episodes to cover.
Amen. Well, Greg, I guess that that covers it on Jung for now.
All right, so always a pleasure, man. We'll do some more.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
All right.
it. On to the next.
All right, folks, share these things.
Amen.
All right. Take care.